Hi, everyone. This is John Daly here for another episode of the Reagan Caucus podcast. My regular co-host, Thomas D. House, had a scheduling conflict today, but AEI's Brent Orrell was kind enough to step in and help us out. Thank you, Brent. We appreciate it. And our guest today is the CEO and co-founder of The Dispatch, my absolute favorite source for national news and commentary. He is the one and only Steve Hayes. Steve, thanks for joining the two of us today on the Reagan Caucus podcast.
Hey, John, happy to be with you. Hey, Brent, how are you? Glad to see a Dispatch contributor among your many other august activities and tremendous accomplishments. Happy to have you as a Dispatch contributor. So.
Excellent. Well, it's great having you on, Steve. I always enjoy talking to you. I will say that I don't want to put a lot of pressure on you right off the bat, but I've got to tell you that your friend and Dispatch co-founder, Jonah Goldberg, he came on this podcast last year, and that episode ended up being our most popular ever. So I would say that the competitive stakes are pretty high here for your appearance today. But, I think it's entirely possible that you could break his record. We do have some
There's no chance. No, Jonah's got a cult. And the people who love Jonah, and they will follow him everywhere. I have no cult. So I will be thrilled if I can, have half the audience that Jonah does.
I think you're underselling yourself here. There's definitely semi-cult status going on. So.
The cult of Hayes, yes. Well, we wanted to talk to you about some national news stories from the past few weeks, and so I had actually put together an outline in preparation for this episode. But then on Wednesday, the Dispatch published a rare editorial that not only included a number of these same topics, but also presented them, I think, in a broader, very important context of the chaos we've been seeing throughout President Trump's second term. That chaos hasn't just been limited to theatrics, as was pointed out in the editorial. It's been causing our country some real damage, both to our nation's character and its constitution, and also our relationships with other countries. And as the Dispatch editors pointed out in that piece, a lot of that damage may be unrealized at this point, by a lot of Americans who may not follow a number of these developments on a daily basis. But it has to be glaringly obvious to Congress, including Republican members of Congress, who, with very few exceptions, have not challenged the president's abuses, nor have they used their authority as the most powerful branch in our federal government to try and rein in those abuses. So Steve, before we get into some of these individual news stories, can you talk a bit about why the timing was right for this editorial by the Dispatch, and also the challenge that was put out there in the piece to Senate Majority Leader John Thune?
Yeah, sure. I mean, John, as you mentioned, we don't do these very often. I think this was our seventh, and we just entered our seventh year. We had our sixth anniversary in October. So we don't do these very often. Back at the Weekly Standard, when I was working there, we did daily editorials. And, having learned that lesson, I think Jonah coming from National Review, where these are more frequent, we decided let's weigh in when, it really sort of requires us to weigh in. I will say there have been a lot of those moments in the past several months. In particular, we have conversations pretty regularly. I think now is the time to weigh in. Now's the time to weigh in. But, I think given what we've seen over the first month of 2026, I'm really going back to the days before the end of 2025, just this extraordinary number of, I think, very significant events and abuses of power from the Trump administration. Things sort of feel like they're spinning out of control. And we wanted to kind of acknowledge that and reflect on that, and then share our thoughts on that. And, if you look overseas first, and you go back to the days just before Christmas, we have had kinetic action. We've had military strikes in Nigeria, in Syria. We had the apprehension and detention of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. You've had President Trump threaten additional kinetic action or regime change in Colombia, Cuba. We've had certainly a lot of talk about kinetic action. I think preparations for kinetic action in Iran. You had, for the better part of the past month, discussion, I think provoked by the president and encouraged by the president, about the United States potentially taking military action against a NATO ally in Denmark to seize territory that's not ours, with the president sort of continually needling Denmark, threatening to take Greenland, provoking our NATO allies. And, we thought these do have consequences. We might not see them immediately, but this does have consequences, particularly overseas. If you think that, the United States played a major role in constructing the post-war liberal rules-based international order, that we did because it benefited us. And now, with these provocations, with these threats, treating allies as if they're adversaries or would-be adversaries, there are real consequences to this. And I think we're beginning to see them. I mean, this had been theoretical as the president was poking and prodding, but I think we're beginning to see them. You're seeing Canada look at trade deals with China. You're seeing the EU and India strike trade deals. You're seeing our allies look for other alliances, whether it's trade, whether it's security, and there will be real consequences. I think we're just beginning to see those consequences now. And then on the domestic front, I think there is this sense, we're talking 5 days after the killing of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, the second killing of a protester in 3 weeks. Certainly it was the case that the administration's representation of what happened I would argue in both killings, but certainly in the killing of Alex Preddy, was just false. They lied about it. They lied repeatedly. They claimed he, like Rene Good, who was killed in the previous incident, was a domestic terrorist. They said he was coming to commit a massacre, one after another of unsupported statements that I think should really cause us concern. And, in particular, this last incident seems to have broken through beyond, the people like us who follow this stuff really closely and to a certain extent follow it for a living and talk about it a lot. You're seeing people weigh in like Victor Wembanyama, the NBA star from France. You're seeing Bruce Springsteen release a new song about Minneapolis. Dave Matthews is jumping in. And, certainly just in my own circles, talking to friends who don't talk about politics, don't follow this. They have sort of a vague idea of what it is that I do for a living, but will be calling and sending me texts like, what is happening? Are we just spinning out of control? So anyway, that's a very long answer to your question. That's why we decided to weigh in. And, I'm glad that we did, and I'm very pleased with the editorial.
I will, but since you brought up the ICE shootings there, I did have a question about that. It seems that, we're at a point now where the administration, I think, understands that the rhetoric was off. They're trying to sort of roll some of that back. At the same time, they seem, higher up people in the administration still seem to be trying to somewhat justify what we saw with Alex Preddy. Some of it's and some of it's included kind of attacks, it would seem, on the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, with the carry laws. And what I'm seeing now is this this narrative that Alex Preddy, a video has emerged of him, I think it was about a week and a half earlier, getting into an altercation with ICE agents. He ended up kicking the back of one of their cars and breaking the tail light. Yeah. A very ugly scene. But there seems to be this attitude, well, hey, this guy was a troublemaker. He kind of had it coming, based on this. I'm curious what you think about. Is the administration helping themselves by going down these lines, or are they further hurting themselves?
Well, I think you saw in the immediate aftermath of the killing of Alex Preddy an attempt by the news media and others sort of going beyond just the reporting of what had happened in that incident, an attempt to valorize Alex Preddy. You had the video emerge of him sort of saying a blessing or making commemorative remarks, memorializing a veteran who had passed. He worked as a nurse, Preddy did, at an ICU or at a veterans hospital. And so you had from sort of the protesting community on the left and the media, the narrative that this was a really good guy. He was out there just protesting because he wanted to he cared about the people who were being, attacked by ICE or chased into their homes. And then this other video emerges, and he was very aggressive in this other video. I mean, he's spitting on ICE agents. He kicks out the taillight of a car. This is inappropriate behavior. It's not consistent with the narrative that had been painted. And I think what you're seeing from the administration, having been on its back heels for the better part of the last 5 days because of this aggressive killing and what the video itself showed, it's almost this sense of relief, like, aha, this guy isn't the hero that the left and the media made him out to be. And we are going to lean in heavily on this video and say this was an instigator, he was a provocateur. And, the unspoken thing, although it has been spoken by some supporters of the administration, is in effect, he deserved this. And I think it's just such a sad commentary on the state of the debate in our country right now, that this is where we are. And, this has been true of mass shootings for a while. It's certainly true in the context of Minneapolis, where people first look to judge the actions and the what we see on video or based on their own politics. And boy, that's a bad place for the country to be.
Yeah, a broken taillight doesn't seem to warrant multiple gunshots in the back.
No.
I mean, that's that doesn't really stand up. But I do think that some of this, and I'd be interested in what you think about this, Steve, but it really seems to me that with the Trump administration, you're always trying to get through multiple layers of distraction, right? So you have foreign policy stuff happening that's meant to distract from what's happening domestically. You have, and then you have this micro incident of somebody getting killed like this, and immediately going to trying to shift the narrative with other videos. And it's very, I mean, this administration does it better than anybody I've ever seen of being able to change the subject. I'm curious as what you think, just like in the media ecosphere, like there are competing currents here, where you've got, on the one hand, you've got Trump and his people doing all this stuff, but then you've got all these citizens taping everything.
Yeah.
Which is very difficult to spin, when you've got sort of handheld iPhone videos that are directly contradicting this spin. So it's really interesting how, all crises are local. You can't really manage a public narrative from Washington, D.C. on something that's happening in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and it's been, one of the most remarkable things that we've seen. I would argue that we've been seeing it for a decade, but certainly it's come to the fore, and people have been noticing it and discussing it more in the aftermath of the Alex Preddy shooting, is the willingness or the eagerness even of the administration and senior administration officials to say things that they know are untrue, right? I mean, this was, some of it's just unsupportable. It may have been speculation, but some of it's just not true. The allegation that Alex Preddy was brandishing a gun. He wasn't brandishing a gun. It was tucked into either a holster or the back of his pants. The idea that he was a domestic terrorist, there's no indication whatsoever that he was a domestic terrorist. And I would say, even, Brent, as you suggest, the emergence of this other video where he's aggressive and inappropriate and certainly deserves to be detained, I think, given what he had done. He was committing vandalism. He was going aggressively after ICE. That doesn't make him a domestic terrorist either. The kind of language that you heard from, again, these are not sort of like low-level administration figures. This is the Secretary of Homeland Security. This is the president's top, and I would argue most influential advisor over his first year, Stephen Miller, Deputy White House Chief of Staff, suggesting that Preddy came to commit a massacre. There's zero evidence whatsoever to suggest that that's what he was there to do. And the administration says these things that are provably and demonstrably untrue. They do it again and again. Our Nick Contagio, my colleague at the Dispatch, had a fantastic article just last Friday, the day before the Peretti shooting, walking through the number of things that the administration had said just in that week that were provably false. The Carolyn Levitt, the White House spokesman after the president, gave a series of remarks in which he meant to say Greenland, but repeatedly said Iceland, claiming that he didn't say what we had seen him on video saying. The willingness to try to lie. I think it's just really interesting to think about why they do what they do. Some of it, I think, is just. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think the answer is that, in part, I mean, first of all, I don't think there's a real strategy here. I think it's more like dual effect things going on.
Yeah.
But I think one of the dual effects or multiple effects that we see going on is that it actually provides them with some air cover to change policy on the ground, right? So they, it isn't just that the president has stepped back and pointed at his aides as being the culprits here. It's that it's changing the actual deployment of CPB on the ground. They're pulling back. And if you can keep people thinking about the argument rather than what's actually happening, that it's kind of like air cover for a fighting retreat on policy itself.
I think that's right. I mean, I think I do think some of it is strategic. I mean, I definitely don't buy the claim that you hear from the most enthusiastic Trump supporters that he's playing 5D chess and this is all well thought out. And, I just don't buy that argument. But I do think, to your point, Brent, there is some strategic advantage to what they're doing, or at least this is how they perceive it, in so far as the current media ecosystem prevents one prevailing narrative. And I think often what they do in moments like this, and I do think this is what we saw in the aftermath of the killing of Renee Good, is they give their people sort of their narrative right away, immediately. This is what we are saying. This is where, if you want to be loyal to us, if you want to be on the team, this is what you should say too. And we've seen that again and again and again. And it takes, I would argue that the most obvious example of this is January 6th, which is, one of the most videotaped events in human history, 40,000 plus hours of video. We saw what happened. We know what happened. It's indisputable that the Trump supporters were the aggressors. I think it's indisputable that they were summoned by President Trump to do the things that they were doing. They were trying to prevent the certification of the vote. And you have half of the Republican Party today who will tell you that, that's not what happened. And the president making his arguments about the stolen election. The other thing I would say, though, is I think there's an inclination among critics to suggest that this is somehow new. And I don't think that's true either. I think they're following the example of President Trump, because this is what he does and has done for a long time. And I'll tell a quick story just to prove the point. You remember, of course, everybody remembers the event in the summer of 2015 where Donald Trump was in Iowa. He was on stage and he went after John McCain and said, I prefer heroes who weren't captured, and really just like aggressive criticism and trashing of John McCain. Well, I happened to be in the balcony that day, and I was there not to cover Donald Trump. I was there to cover all the other candidates because I didn't think Trump was likely to be a viable option for the Republican Party. And he said all these things that were, either untrue or deserved, I think, some tough questioning in response. So I went down to the press conference in the basement of this auditorium at Iowa State, and pretty aggressively, I'd say more aggressively than I probably should have been, questioned Donald Trump on this. I mean, it basically sort of evolved into a shouting match, and I was shouting these questions. And the amazing thing is, I've got my notebook in my hand. I'm reading his direct quotes back to him, and he's telling me I didn't say that. And as a reporter, I mean, I've been a reporter at that point, I don't know, for almost 20 years. And it's so disarming, because I'm reading these quotes. I'm pretty good at taking note. I'm pretty good at getting exact quotes down. Like I said, I've got a lot of practice doing this. And he's telling me that what I'm reading from him was not what he said. And I'm thinking, but wait, there's video. There was an auditorium full of people. There's all this. just flat out lying about what had transpired. And that's because he's a liar. I mean, he's an inveterate liar.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I think it even
he
goes
doesn't
deeper than
care.
lying, though. I think it goes deeper than lying. I wrote a piece on this for another outlet that shall remain nameless, about I kind of blame Norman Vincent Peale for all of this. Who with his proto prosperity gospel convinced Donald Trump that he could create reality.
Yeah.
And I think that's really it.
Yeah.
He can't remember what he said, but he knows that he has an obligation to create the reality that he wants to see, and he's very good at it.
Yeah. But I guess, I mean, my question to you would be, I buy that. I think you're right. Was he doing that early? I mean, this is July of 2015. Was he doing it that early because he'd learned through his time in the private sector that it can work, that he could go and, whether he's talking to people in a deal or what?
I don't think there's any question that that's the case. I mean, his career in business for anybody else would have been impossible. Nobody would have gone back to him after multiple failures and continued to lend him money. And he's an extraordinary salesman. And I think he has that power, as many good salespeople do, to create the picture that people want to see. And I think it's all one thread. This is one thing throughout his entire career. I mean, The Apprentice is itself an example of this. The way that he could shape the public perception of him, even though he didn't say anything on that set that wasn't fed to him, right? These were scripted events, and he was following the script, but he has the ability to sort of transcend that and communicate authenticity.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing. My colleague Nick Katojo, in this piece that he wrote for us, is it's that, but it's also he lies because he can, and to a certain extent, it's a loyalty test. He's trying to see who's gonna pick up this argument, and I think he determines who his allies. If you believe that Donald Trump's sort of top consideration for people that works for him or people he involves in policy making or his supporters is unquestioning fealty, this is a way to help him determine who has it and who doesn't.
He lies because it works.
Yeah,
I think that's the bottom line.
You did bring up January 6th, Steve, and I wanted to ask you about. So I think Mitch McConnell, has a very impressive legacy, for when he's finally out of the picture. Except for the one stain, I think that, at least I think it's a stain, other people do as well, that he didn't try harder for an impeachment conviction for Donald Trump after January 6th. And now in this Dispatch editorial, it seemed like you kind of were calling out John Thune, who's in that position now, not specifically to work towards impeachment, but to use Congress, to lead Congress in a way that helps hold Trump accountable and helps deal with some of these excesses. I think it was mentioned in the editorial that you see him as best positioned to be able to do that as the Senate Majority Leader, being that the Democrats are probably going to win the House back in the midterms. But do you see him as having this? I mean, he really does seem to have a very important role that he could be playing here, and so far hasn't quite done that.
Yeah, I mean, look, we didn't really think it was whether or not Republicans lose the House in the midterm elections or not. We didn't think it was worth mentioning or dwelling on Mike Johnson, because we don't think he has the sort of
good point.
Constitution or fortitude to do some of these things. And I do think that of John Thune. I first covered John Thune back, this is like 2010, 2011, when he was thinking about running for president. And I spent a fair amount of time with him back in his hometown of Murdo, South Dakota, traveled around the state with him. I've gotten to know him through, through all of his time in the Senate, really. And I think he's a good man. He's a Christian. He talks like a Christian. He is a believer. He cares about right and wrong. He has been, I think he serves because he's a patriotic American. I think he has an appreciation of history. And he also cares about limiting government. That's sort of what he made his bones on. He's a Reagan conservative, I say on this podcast. And I think one of the reasons he stayed in the Senate before Trump was reelected was in part to put himself in a position where if there was a big moment, there was a time to do the right thing, he would be the one to make that decision, not Rick Scott or John Cornyn or these others. And, my view is sort of we're there. We're at that moment. Now, I would have hoped that this moment would have come during the confirmation hearings, sort of allowing all of some of the kind of clownish figures that Donald Trump nominated to serve in his cabinet to pass through without so much as really even a critical hearing. Seems to me a foolish move. I mean, nobody should be surprised that the FBI is engaged in law enforcement activities at a ballot counting station in Fulton County, Georgia, related supposedly to, the BS we saw, Donald Trump's claims that the election was stolen in Georgia. It's Kash Patel. He's the head of the FBI. If you'd listened to him in his appearances on Devin Nunes' podcast, this is exactly what you'd have predicted from Kash Patel running the FBI. And the idea that Republicans just sort of waved him through, I thought was gross at the time, and we're seeing the consequences of it now. I do think as we talk about the sort of chaos and disorder that we're seeing come out of Washington, driven by Donald Trump and the Trump administration, to say nothing of sort of the constitutional prerogatives of the legislative branch, this is a time for people who are serving and who look at what's happening and say, I'm not on board with this. This is a time to stand up. If not, what are you doing there? And as I say, we didn't include Mike Johnson because we don't expect that of Mike Johnson. But I think with John Thune, and there are a few others in the Senate, you would expect that. And the final point I'll make is, it is still the case 10 years into the Trump era that there's a sizable group of elected Republicans in Washington, D.C., serving in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, who aren't on board with MAGA Trump Republicanism. They will still, if you get them privately, roll their eyes and say, do you believe this? This is a crazy world that we're living in. I can't believe what he did on this, and this. And then in some cases, literally walk to the microphones and say, thank God for Savior Trump. He's saving the company. We've got him, because they know that's going to please the base. And, at a certain point, if you're the leader, whether you have leader in your title or not, and John Thune does, if you're the leader, doesn't it fall to you to say to that group, they exist because you're having the same conversations. I assure you, they're having more detailed conversations amongst themselves than they are with me. And they're having those conversations with me. Don't you owe it to yourself and to your conscience and to your country and maybe to your creator to say, hey, this isn't okay. We're not going along with this anymore. So that was the reason we decided to make that specific appeal, was because we think he is somebody who could potentially be that kind of a leader.
I think this bears even further examination, though, because, with narrow majorities, particularly in the House, but also in the Senate, with narrow majorities, the leader is really constrained in his leadership, right? So they've got these narrow majorities, make it very difficult. The other thing to do what you're suggesting, and with Thune, I have this feeling that, he spent so many years under the tutelage of Mitch McConnell that we're seeing the extension of Mitch McConnell's leadership style, which is always don't get more than a half step in front of your caucus, of a majority of your caucus, right?
Yes.
And that is a very, I share your admiration for John Thune, or at least the John Thune that I, sort of grew up politically watching. But that, I think, has left a mark on him. That this is how you manage This is coalition management. And maybe that's what we should call them, is not leader. Maybe we call them manager, of the coalition.
It's a perfect distinction, and one that's very worth making. I would argue that you can lead in a number of different ways, right? A leader, whether you're Senate Majority Leader or whether you're just somebody as a Republican senator in the conference, Jonathan could lead procedurally, and he could do some things procedurally, or he could have pushed back on the confirmation hearings, as I mentioned. There are all sorts of things that I would suggest he do differently, and try to guide the Republican majority in a different way by doing the kinds of things that Mitch McConnell did, and sometimes taking chances. There's also sort of this broader sense of leadership. And it's when he's asked a question, as he was earlier this week, about Kristi Noem. His home state, was governor of South Dakota. He knows her well. I think he knows her strengths. He's certainly familiar with her limitations. When he's asked a question about whether she's serving the country well, in the aftermath of what we have just seen with the killing of Alex Breddy in Minneapolis, you know what the right answer isn't? It's not. The most important thing is that President Trump has confidence in his nominees. That is not the most important thing. It's not one of the 50 most important things. The most important thing is that the country be governed well, that we make moral decisions, that we do the right thing. And I don't, honestly, excuse my language, I don't give a shit whether Donald Trump has confidence in his specific cabinet nominees. That's irrelevant to me if they're behaving the way that I think she's behaving. Let's stipulate, she's become something of a fall guy or fall girl in this scenario. I think the problems go well above Kristi Noem. But given what she said, given her willingness to say things that were untrue in the aftermath of this, given her willingness to I think, continue to provoke and divide, it doesn't really matter to me whether Donald Trump has confidence in her. And to be honest about it, again, I don't think it really matters to John Thune whether Trump has confidence in Kristi Noem. So answering the question in a direct and forthright way, to me, would be a terrific opportunity to lead. Whether he is able to do the kinds of coalition management that you point out, and I think you're exactly right about Thune having learned sort of at the feet of Mitch McConnell. But there are other ways to lead, and I think this moment calls out for him to exercise those.
Yeah,
I did want to. Go ahead. Did you have something, Brent?
I was going to say, everybody could spend a little time reading Václav Havel. Making
Amen.
people say things they know are not true is the foundation of Trump's power over the coalition. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, true. I did want to ask you, Steve, a little more about NATO. You touched on it earlier. President Trump has, of course, caused a lot of tension with the NATO alliance. In his first term, he often liked to frame NATO as kind of a coalition of ingrates who were just kind of taking advantage of the generosity of the United States. This second term has been, of course, far worse. Trump's threats against Greenland that you brought up led to this increased deployment of NATO troops there. His dismissal of the ultimate sacrifices made by European NATO troops, and in some cases on behalf of the United States, rightfully upset a lot of people, including leaders of these European governments. One line in the Dispatch editorial that really struck me was this: American leadership of NATO remains on paper, but it is a de facto dead letter, and the alliance itself may soon be too. Steve, what do you think are the odds? The odds are by the end of this Trump term, 3 years from now, that the NATO alliance as we know it will indeed be over.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I don't know, to be candid, to start with candor. But if NATO is no more, either in reality or sort of as a matter of sort of de facto reality, it will be because Donald Trump wants it that way. I mean, you remember there was all of this reporting toward the end of Donald Trump's first term that he had been asking his advisors, saying to his advisors repeatedly, sort of, what good is NATO? Why are we in NATO? I don't want to be in NATO anymore. And there were a series of front page New York Times articles written about this. Some of his advisors confirmed that this was the way that Donald Trump saw the alliance. And I think he just doesn't have an appreciation of history and what it is. And, it's certainly Donald Trump's kind of grievance mindset that somebody's always ripping him off somewhere. And in this case, it was NATO. And I think if that was how he felt about the alliance in the first term, we're now seeing him act on it now. And one of the most interesting things to me was in the public discussion of this this Greenland the Greenland pursuit. Should we call it the Greenland pursuit? You saw people who objected to what Trump was doing say, well, gosh, doesn't he realize that this could imperil NATO by threatening to invade a fellow NATO country? And my thought always was yes. And that may be the goal. That's a feature, not a bug here. I think that may be the goal. And we've seen in his public comments beyond that he doesn't value the alliance. He doesn't care. And especially, I think if he's looking to sort of recenter the way that we think about national security to our own hemisphere. He's long claimed he doesn't want to be involved in forever wars. He's long claimed he doesn't want the United States to be the policeman of the world. Sort of weakening or ending the NATO alliance would allow him to do that, and maybe save a few bucks in the short term by doing so. I think it's a grossly ignorant way to look at history, and it's a grossly ignorant way to understand the contributions that alliance has done. I mean, it may be the case, and I think it probably is the case, that Donald Trump, his arguments about NATO freeloading and failing to pay their the requisite portion of GDP and failing to fund their defense, the requisite portion of GDP that's in the actual alliance agreements, might be right to needle them about it, to provoke them and to urge them to spend more. But even if they're the freeloaders that he's long believed they are, who benefits from that most? I would argue that we do. I mean, so it'd be great if they weren't freeloading and they did more, but like, this is 70 years of US planning to create the international order that we benefit from more than anybody else. And to sort of trash it this way, I think we'll pay for it for a long time. And it is the case, I would say, that this isn't theoretical anymore. It's not just that our allies are wondering, boy, he's unpredictable, what should we do? They're not doing it, right? They're taking these steps. They're seeking these other alliances. They're looking to create different security architecture to protect themselves, and looking elsewhere beyond the United States, again, both in security and trade. And when you have somebody who I think was at least Trump open-minded, maybe Trump friendly, like Giorgia Meloni in Italy, registering her deep offense at Donald Trump claiming that our NATO allies fought from the back when they were supporting us after we were attacked in Afghanistan and Iraq. That tells you, I think, how deep the frustration goes. And if you believe that international alliances are based on, certainly interests, but also trust and goodwill, and you're sort of shrugging off or actively destroying the trust and goodwill, the latter two, the consequence, I think, will be dire, and we're likely to start seeing them pretty soon.
I think back on the youth of my years, and we all knew back in the 70s and 80s that the Soviet Union was doing everything that it could to try to divide NATO. And we understood the stakes of that. And because we understood the stakes of that, it was very ineffective. At least when you pull back and look at it from a historical standpoint, it was ham-handed, it was not effective. Donald Trump is actually achieving what Leonid Brezhnev wanted or tried to do. And I think that's a signal change that, again, Steve, you keep talking about the long-term effect or the effects of this and how they pile up. And it's like, you're absolutely right, but it's not just the pile up right now. It's the pile up 20 years from now.
Yes.
Because all of these, whether it's domestic or international, all of these failures of governance that we are inflicting upon ourselves are going to come back to haunt our children and their children.
Yes.
Because it is undermining the capacity of the United States to maintain stability in the world.
Amen. And when you see, to your point, Brent, when you see the Trump administration do the kinds of saber rattling it's done over Denmark and Greenland, and you see Vladimir Putin give a speech in which he talks about, he sort of praises and understands what Donald Trump is doing here. And Kirill Dmitriev, one of Putin's top advisors, who's been sort of the main interlocutor with the U.S. in negotiations, diplomatic discussions about Ukraine and beyond, going on social media and echoing the kinds of things and sort of taunting the United States. And I think people like us who believe in the NATO alliance, like, finally somebody understands. He had some tweet about, finally at Davos, which happened last week, and all these CEOs and international political leaders gather. He said, finally, there will be something worth talking about at Davos, the dissolution of the transatlantic union or partnerships or something like that. This is what they want. And it's what they've wanted, as you point out, for decades. But it's amazing to me that they're watching Trump, and rather than just keep their mouth shut and saying, like, hey, this is going great, this is going according to plan, we couldn't want anything more than what we're seeing, they are so bullish about their ability to hasten the end of these alliances, NATO in particular, that they're out flaunting the fact that Trump is doing their bidding. I mean, it really is a remarkable thing. If you look at the rhetoric coming from the top levels of Putin world, they're sort of teasing the rest of us and the Europeans and others. Pretty incredible moment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I wanted to take this in a little bit different direction now, Steve, although I guess there is a sort of a Russian adjacent thing going on here, but Tucker Carlson. Steve, you've been all over a new book by Tucker Carlson, by Jason Zengerle. It's called Hated by All the Right People, Tucker Carlson and the Unraveling of the Conservative Mind. You wrote a piece on it for the Dispatch, and you also had Zengerle on for a podcast discussion. The book really gets into Carlson's past and the evolution he's gone through. I thought you described Carlson quite well in your piece as, this is a quote, as a radical but influential voice whose persuasive power comes apart from his mastery of demagogic oversimplification. I thought that was very well. Steve, what were your biggest takeaways from reading that book, and did it align well with your previous understanding, including your personal relationship with Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a terrific book by Jason Zengerle, and he tells the story, I would say, in two different ways. One is a focus on Tucker Carlson, the person, and what might be motivating Tucker to have undergone these pretty dramatic changes. And Zengerle does a great job of taking us from the speech that Tucker gave at CPAC in 2009, where he lays out the vision for this media company that he's about to launch that becomes the Daily Caller, where he says it's really important that conservatives deal in reality and report facts and create institutions to mirror the New York Times or that might complement the New York Times, rather than dwell in fantasy land and create conspiracies and things like that. And then in short order, there are some good reporters who have come through the Daily Caller, and they've done some good reporting, but it was largely given over to conspiracies and things that would generate clicks. And so what Zengerle does is he focuses a bit on Tucker Carlson and his own personal evolution. But to me, the more important story is the story he tells about conservative media and the incentives that created the kind of, I think, really putrescent conservative media ecosystem that we're seeing right now, where it is the case that if you want to get attention, we live in this attention economy. It's driven by clicks and likes and the desire for attention. And you're seeing, I think, far too many conservative influencers and individuals, but also institutions, sort of give in to that. And Yeah, well, it'd be nice if we could deal in reality, and it'd be nice if we could do some reporting. But really, we know what's going to give us the attention we need, and we can still monetize that attention, even though the ecosystem has moved from a place where clicks really led directly to money, and now we're in much more of a subscription-driven media ecosystem, which I think is healthy. You still have outlets that are primarily concerned with attention and making ideological arguments that may or may not be consistent with what we're observing. I mean, this is similar to what we were talking about with Trump at the beginning of our conversation. Making arguments that may have zero reflection of reality because they know it's going to get them attention, and I think we've seen that throughout the conservative media world, and it's regrettable. And Tucker Carlson certainly has driven a lot of that, and he's become sort of a caricature where he's shilling for American enemies and saying things that are demonstrably and provably untrue, and you still have people imitating him because he's succeeded in getting attention, and he's succeeded financially by doing so.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this topic, just the broader media conservatism, where it's gone with Jonah Goldberg when he was on. And one thing I admire about you and Jonah, Steve, is that, and there are many things, but you guys were calling out Tucker Carlson before it was politically and professionally safe to do so on the right. In fact, Tucker, in his crazy Patriot Purge documentary, was one of the reasons he too left Fox News.
Yeah.
It wasn't until June of last year when President Trump took a shot at Carlson over Carlson's opposition to the Iran strike that other media righties suddenly felt comfortable taking on Tucker as well and calling out his, you mentioned his embrace of America's enemies, this conspiratorial nonsense, his tie-ins with anti-Semitism. I'm curious, do you ever look at these people, Steve, and think, boy, it would have been nice to hear from you guys a heck of a lot sooner, like when Tucker was whitewashing January 6th or helping, turn the political right against Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, you guys were really out in front of this, and now it just seems like it's kind of a trend now. It's okay to do now that Trump kind of gave the permission slip.
Well, I'd be lying to you if I said that wouldn't have been nice at the time. Sure, it would have been nice. And look, I mean, it's sort of obvious and undeniable now as he's, calling Daryl Cooper, who's a sort of Nazi revisionist historian, Daryl Cooper himself is not a Nazi, but he's making Holocaust denial arguments and suggesting that Winston Churchill was the real villain in World War II. And he's, Tucker's amplifying people like Nick Fuentes and giving him friendly interviews, sort of on and on and on. It's now obvious and unavoidable that Tucker is who Tucker is. I do think it was obvious back then. I mean, if you just to take the Patriot Purge, and you're right, that was the main reason we left Fox, because Fox was going to put out this 70-minute 3-part documentary series reimagining the January 6th attacks, and it opened in the trailer with, these claims that the helicopters had left Afghanistan and come back to the United States, that Americans, Trump supporters, were being put in Guantanamo, and it had, saying that over footage of people in orange jumpsuits being waterboarded. This is incendiary, inflammatory, and, most importantly, false and misleading things to say. And the idea that was okay and this stuff is just too far. I mean, I don't know. I had hoped that we might have occasioned more scrutiny on the kinds of things that Tucker was saying back then. It certainly was the case that when Patriot Purge when the trailer aired on Tucker's primetime show on Fox and then subsequently aired on Fox Nation, it did cause, it was sort of the proverbial bomb going off inside of Fox. And I think there were a lot of the good reporters and producers and editors and executives at Fox who said, kind of, what are we doing? Like, what business are we in here? Like, if this stuff is acceptable, kind of what isn't acceptable? And, I think you've had people who have eventually left Fox who had that view. I would point to Chris Wallace, There are others who are not on-air people, but it was the kind of thing I think that was really kind of shattering to people who had worked at Fox and said, well, look, there might be some excesses here. I wouldn't have done it this way. This is too far. But that was just, it's kind of a different category altogether. And that's why Joan and I ended up deciding that we couldn't stay. I mean, I think I would have done that if I'd been at the Weekly Standard. I would have done that regardless of where I was working at the time. But it was particularly difficult to be at Fox when things like that were happening, because we had started the Dispatch, which, presented a very different picture to people and said that we're going to do journalism this way. We think there are problems in the conservative media ecosystem. We're going to do journalism this way, and we're going to put in the resources to do the reporting and to do the things that aren't as profitable, so that we can provide information that people can trust and know is reliable as they try to figure out what's going on in the country.
Yeah, on the topic of journalism, I know, Brent, you had a question you were going to ask, sort of something that's in your wheelhouse and how it ties into journalism.
Yeah, I really wanted to hear from you, Steve, about how you see AI affecting journalism. Both, how's it affecting the ecosystem? Then how is it affecting kind of the development of journalists as professionals?
Yeah.
And then putting on your magic glasses and looking into the future, how do you see this affecting an institution like the Dispatch?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. As you can imagine, I spent a lot of time thinking about this and reading about it and trying to make myself smart about what's coming, about what's here, and about what's coming. And I'll be like, again, this is the kind of transparency that I'm inclined toward, that I think sometimes makes other people I work with shudder, because maybe we shouldn't be talking about this as openly as we do. If we had, the Dispatch has long thought about putting out sort of a public, hey, this is how we're thinking about AI, because I think it's helpful to have your readers, and particularly our paying members, understand the way that we look at this. If we had put out such a statement a couple of years ago, which I was in favor of doing, I think it would have been far too restrictive. My view was, and to a large extent remains, we cannot we can't use AI-driven content and put it in front of our people. It's way too important for us to be the originator, the cultivator, and ultimately the disseminator of our own content with human eyes and human reporting. And that is sort of where we begin our discussion and our thinking about AI, and it's ultimately where we end up. But had we put out such a statement, I think it would have precluded things that we are now actually doing. We launched just a couple weeks ago something called Dispatch Voiced. And what it has done is taken our text-based products, our text-based work, and we now have AI voicing everything we do, everything we're publishing. And, I have very mixed feelings about it, but fewer mixed feelings today than I would have 2 years ago, when I would have probably sworn that off and said we wouldn't be doing that kind of thing, because I think it is really important to be able to show people sort of, this is the work that we're doing. But since we announced these audio versions of the work that we're doing, which are simply read by an AI voice, I think we've taken, I don't know the exact current number, but upwards of a third of our paying members have signed up for this.
Wow.
And the feedback that I have gotten has been overwhelmingly positive. People who have said, I want to keep up with everything that you guys are publishing. I think you're doing great work, but I don't have 4 hours to sit down and read Jonah and Nick and Kevin and listen to Sarah and David and read the great work that's in TMD and your Capitol Hill. Like, just don't have the time. And having the audio versions of these articles available allows people to consume a lot more if they want to. And just in having those conversations, including with some people are close to me about that, it's been great for us. We think that our stuff is having much broader reach. This is the AI versions, the audio versions are limited to our membership. So we've seen a lot more people sign up to be members because they want that too. So that's been a huge positive for us. And we're going to mix in, we want our authors to do some reading of their own material, actually, and we're going to mix in more of that. I don't know that we're going to make it a requirement, but I'd like to have people step up and do that more. And I think people will get a lot out of it. But anyway, I'm sorry, there's a bit of a digression, but Brent, it's such a great question, because if you'd asked me this question 2 years ago, I would have said, look, this coming commodification of journalism is going to be bad. It's going to be bad for everybody. We're going to get much more AI slop. And just thinking about it from the perspective of the Dispatch, we think this is good for us because we're already differentiated that way, right? I mean, we're not giving you the kind of stuff that you're seeing everywhere else. We are far from just what I would say, to consider to be a mere opinion slinging website. I mean, that's the easy way to make money in journalism these days, is right? Have 10 people, put 10 people on staff, pay them by what they produce and by how many people come and click. You incentivize clicks so you can make some more money. You get people to write stuff that they know will be provocative and bold and will draw people in, whether it's good or not, whether it's reported or not, whether it's factual or not. That's what you're incentivizing. And that's what we've seen for the better part of the past decade. And that's what we launched against. So, in a sense, we think we're very well prepared for the coming commodification of news because we launched against that. But there are ways to use AI to enhance the work that we're doing and to reach more people. And I don't want us to be so pure and precious about it that we don't take advantage of those opportunities. But the bottom line, and again, sorry, longer answer than you probably expected, but we do think that one of our differentiators is that we do the work. We have people who come and do the reporting and do the research, and it matters to us above anything and everything that we're reliable, that we're fact-based. We won't bat 1,000 when we do that. We'll make our mistakes, but the mistakes won't come because we're relying on something that Gemini spits out.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's quite consistent with what I'm seeing in other sectors as I look at the way AI is affecting, knowledge economy work, which has occupied a lot of my thinking for the last year. And it's very consistent. And I think you're absolutely on the right track. I mean, the differentiator for the Dispatch is around its quality, the quality of its work, and not its quantity. You guys put out a lot of stuff. No, that's not what I'm saying. But people know that the time that they spend investing in reading or listening now to what you do is high value, high signal versus high noise. And there's so I think that's the right, directionally, absolutely the right thing. I'm curious, and we may not have time to explore this right now, but I'm really curious as to, you've got such talented people working for you, right? Where are the efficiencies that AI can bring to that process of producing high quality stuff that allows them to do more, to increase the amount, or increase the volume of the signal, that you're trying to create. So that's, I just think, something worth thinking about and exploring.
Yeah, I mean, I would say sort of AI as it exists today, generative AI, there are all sorts of, it can be a very valuable tool. I mean, you can ask people if if we want to cover some obscure topic that a lot of people aren't talking about, and we want to know, years ago when I was a cub reporter, I would have had to call all sorts of people. Hey, how do I find the expert on X? And it would have been a series of 10 phone calls. And that in and of itself could have taken up the better part of my reporting day. Now you can type it into ChatGPT or one of these other and say, give me the 10 best experts on X. And you can have that right away. And then you can say, give me the contact information for the 10 best experts on X. And you've collapsed the day of reporting into this thing. Now, from my perspective, I'm not going to trust that list, right, I am going to want to make sure that these are in fact the 10 best experts. I'm not going to take that for granted. They may include some total clown who's cranked out a bunch of silly stuff, who we shouldn't be relying on. So,
John and I are both raising our hands.
I will. Well, in that instance, we want our reporters and our writers and our podcasters to go that extra step, and as they're interviewing the experts, making their way down the list, hey, do you trust these other people? And if 5 of them say no, that guy's a clown. There are ways, I think, to create those efficiencies, but I think it can help on the front end if it's part of your sort of process to double and triple and quadruple check everything that you're getting as a result of those efficiencies. And we do that. We require that.
I use it the same way. I mean, I'm constantly playing these models against each other to, okay, so this is what Chat came up with, but what does Anthropic or Claude say about this? And what does Gemini say about this? And they do diverge. You do find that the different platforms have different blind spots. So I think y'all are on exactly the right track, I think.
I think the real question, to go back to your original query, Brent, is what, I think we've seen some changes with the prevalence of generative AI and the ability to sort of, go beyond search to do the kinds of things you want to do and make the work more efficient. I think the real question, and this is going to be transformative, and it's coming quickly, is what will sort of the popular uptake of agentic AI mean? I mean, will articles be the way that people consume things? Will there be kind of discrete podcasts? Is that the way that we're going to do this? If people, are able to kind of take to bring AI along with them at every step and query AI and get exactly what they want, what does that mean for institutions like us? Again, we think we're not cocky about it at all. We are paying attention, and we're adjusting, and we're listening, and we're trying to be one step ahead. But we do feel pretty confident that because of the quality of the material that we provide, that will remain. It's been a differentiator for us for 6+ years. We think it will remain a differentiator. And in some ways, it might actually be an enhanced differentiator because of the slop that AI creates. I think the question is how people interact with AI in the future. How do we adjust in a way that allows us to keep providing that?
I definitely think there's a kind of synthesis function that AI can provide that will be useful to journalistic organizations, like stepping one step above individual reporters, which is looking across everything that you're producing. What does that all add up to? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? Where are people, where are people getting what they need? Where could we do better? I think all of that is the unexplored territory here around AI, part of it. And then a step above that is how does this look? How does what our universe look like compared to, our the other organizations that we are competing against, or competing with, I should say. And that's there's a lot. AI can raise operational awareness to such heights that I think first movers on this are going to have a huge advantage, regardless of the field that they're in.
Yes.
It's like,
absolutely,
if you're the first manufacturer that really figures out how to incorporate generative AI into improving production methods and building new factories, which is already happening, you're already like a year ahead of everybody else. And that is going to compound over time. It doesn't just stop there, because you'll then be moving on to the next thing. Anyway, so I think you're definitely on the right track with it.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. We'll soon know, right? We'll see the results as these changes are coming quickly.
That's right. Well, Steve, you've been very charitable with your time. I'm glad we ended things on that AI discussion. I thought that was very fascinating. I want to thank you for coming on the Reagan Caucus podcast. We didn't mean to take you over an hour with it, but we appreciate your time.
I think my answers were a little long. I got a lot to say these days, you know.
Oh, that's okay. No, we would go forever, but we do try to keep everybody under an hour. And but no, we appreciate you joining us and having this discussion. Brent, I also want to thank you for subbing in for Thomas today. You were an excellent fill-in host, and I appreciate you helping us out. And to everybody else who's watching or listening today, if you watch today's episode on YouTube, as always, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcast or some other audio platform, please like and subscribe as well. And we will see you next time on the Reagan Caucus Podcast.